Can mice eat iron? In a small village, there once lived a merchant called Mani Ram who incurred great losses in his business. One by one, he had to sell off his possessions. In the end, all he had left were his weighing scales. He had used them to weigh the groceries in his shop. They were large scales made of iron, and they had come to Mani Ram from his great 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 grandfather. Once, Mani Ram had to go to the neighboring town for some work. Since he lived all alone, Mani Ram was worried that in his absence his precious weighing scales might be misplaced. So he decided to leave them with his friend Lakshman. Lakshman agreed to keep them safely for his friend, and Mani Ram went off on his journey. However, when Mani Ram returned, he was shocked by what he heard from Lakshman. I am afraid, my friend, that though I had kept your scales very carefully, they have been eaten up.
Eaten up? Impossible. No creature eats iron,
shouted Mani Ram. Mice ate them up, said Lakshman with a shrug. I tried to save your scales, but the mice gobbled them up before I could do anything. Mani Ram guessed at once that Lakshman was lying, and there was no way he could get his scales back by arguing or requesting. He would have to think of a clever plan. So Mani Ram got up with a loud sigh and said,
You're right, friend. It is not your fault at all. It is just my bad luck that the mice chose to eat iron instead of food.
Lakshman heaved a sigh of relief. He had not thought that it would be so easy to fool his friend.
I have just one favor to ask of you,
said Mani Ram.
I am going to bathe in the river. As you see, I am carrying a large bundle. Will you ask your son to help me carry my things?
Since Lakshman had already got what he wanted, he was more than happy to do as his friend asked. He called his son and told him to go with Mani Ram to the river. Mani Ram went with the boy to the river and bathed. After that, he left the boy in his house and went to Lakshman's house mourning loudly. Lakshman, on hearing the cries, came out running. Mani Ram said,
While we were bathing in the river, a hawk swooped down and carried your son away.
Lakshman was beside himself with anger. He screamed, Liar! Cheat! You think I am foolish enough to believe your story? Bring me back my son or I'll tell the Sarpanch. Mani Ram just shrugged his shoulders and said,
I did try to save your son, but the hawk flew away with him before I could do anything.
An angry Lakshman took Mani Ram to the Panchayat and complained to the Sarpanch that Mani Ram had kidnapped his son. The Sarpanch asked Mani Ram what had happened. Mani Ram replied meekly,
I did not kidnap his son, sir. It is true I took the boy to the river with me. He was sitting on the river bank while I went into the water for a dip. Suddenly, I saw a hawk swoop down on the boy and carry him away. What nonsense!
The Sarpanch exclaimed.
How is that possible? What have you done with the boy?
The villagers who had gathered to hear the case also insisted that Mani Ram tell them the truth. Mani Ram smiled softly and said,
His mice eat up my iron scales, and I don't raise a hue and cry. But when a hawk carries away his son, why then he says I lie?
The Sarpanch was a wise man. He realized that there was more to this case than meets the eye. He smiled at Mani Ram and said kindly,
Instead of talking in riddles, why don't you tell us what actually happened?
Mani Ram told all the villagers how Lakshman had tried to cheat him. He ended by saying that if mice could eat heavy iron scales, then why couldn't a hawk fly away with a big boy? Everyone burst out laughing when they heard this. The Sarpanch glared at Lakshman and ordered him to return Mani Ram's scales immediately. Shamefacedly, Lakshman did as he was told. He then apologized to Maniram. Maniram returned the boy to Lakshman and went back home happily, clutching his precious scales.